On December 12th, Eric was standing in line with his younger cousin, waiting to see the mall Santa that his cousin was super excited to see. They had waited in line for nearly 3 hours, since this was the only mall for miles with a Santa volunteer. That was fine. Eric didn't care all that much, as he had nothing else going on that day. What he did care about was getting to the front of the line and finding out that Santa wasn't even Santa. It was Mrs. Claus. Eric looked at the volunteer playing an elf and asked what was going on. The elf apologized and said they only have one Santa volunteer, and he came down with the seasonal cold, so his wife stepped in and was playing Mrs. Claus. Eric scoffed and said that was bullshit, that no kid actually wanted to see her. Eric then turned around and yelled to the many people behind him that Santa wasn't even here and that it was just some lady. There was a lot of crying, followed by angry parents leaving the line. Eric then turned to his cousin and told him he'd bring him back when Santa was here. His cousin seemed disappointed and said he really didn't mind seeing her, but then asked if she wasn't really Santa's wife. Eric nodded and said that was true, that the elves here were just playing a nasty trick and wasting people's time. The elf that Eric had spoken to looked really pissed off and asked him to leave before he called security. Eric laughed and said he was leaving anyway. Then he and his cousin left the line and made their way to the exit. Before he got to the exit, though, someone grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Eric was annoyed, but then surprised that it was the woman playing Mrs. Claus. Eric asked her what she wanted, then said she had wasted enough of his time. The woman said she merely wanted to know why Eric hated her so much. Eric shook his head and said it wasn't really him. No one cared about some dumb woman. They wanted the big man himself. The woman looked appalled and said that she may just be a woman, but that doesn't make her any less special than the big man. She then said she works just as hard as him at the North Pole, and things wouldn't get done without her. Eric scoffed again, then called her a liar. She was nothing but a sweet treat for the big man, and she knew it. Eric's cousin had no idea what they were talking about, but he defended Mrs. Claus. He told Eric that she feeds everyone and helps Santa manage the workshops. He then said she even cleans most of the clothes. Eric shook his head and told his cousin that cooking and cleaning were all women were good for, so it was expected. The woman gasped and said Eric was quite naughty and needed a new view on women. She then poked Eric's forehead and said that over the next 12 days he'll gain a new view and appreciation for women. Eric shook his head, told her she was crazy, and finally left the mall, taking his cousin home, then going home himself. By the time he woke up in the morning, he had forgotten all about the woman, but she hadn't forgotten about him, and as she promised, she was going to change his view on women and make him appreciate them more. When Eric woke up and sat up, something appeared out of thin air and floated in front of him. Eric nearly jumped out of bed and was cursing, because such a thing shouldn't be possible, yet it was happening. Eric reluctantly reached over and grabbed the item, and it turned out to be a small piece of paper, almost like a business card. Eric turned it over and saw that there was writing on the back of it. The first line read, "To the ignorant man who thinks women are lesser than men." Eric looked angry. It was from the woman from yesterday. Somehow she broke into his house, which wasn't okay. He was about to get up and call the cops, but the rest of the note started to glow, and he found himself forced to read it. On the first day before Christmas, I give to you a very small bosom of your own. As soon as he finished reading the note, it vanished, and he felt his chest getting tighter. Eric looked down and gasped. Through his tank top he could see them, the pair of lumps that most women had, lumps that a man like him shouldn't. Eric jumped up in a panic and ran to his bathroom. He tore off his shirt and checked them, and sure enough, he wasn't dreaming or hallucinating. Eric freaked out for a bit, but then grabbed something to tie around his chest, as while they were small, they'd surely be noticeable through his clothes, and he couldn't let anyone know that he had them. He then got dressed, wearing 3 shirts and a sweater just in case, and then went back to the mall. He was hoping to be able to speak to the woman from before and make her undo whatever wicked magic she did to him, but she wasn't there today. Instead, they were doing a Christmas Cho-to-Cho train all day. Eric was annoyed and then asked a mall employee when Santa, more importantly Mrs. Claus, was coming back. The employee thought about it and said they wouldn't be back for a few days. They apparently traveled around a lot to visit other malls and kids that don't have a Santa and Mrs. Claus, the volunteer. Eric sighed and said he wasn't sure he could wait until then. The employee raised an eyebrow and then said Eric looked a little old for Santa. Eric looked at him annoyed and said he wasn't here to sit on the big man's lap. The employee snapped his fingers and said he must want to volunteer as an elf. Eric looked even more annoyed and asked the employee if he really looked like elf material. The employee frowned and said elves come in all shapes and sizes. Eric just shook his head and left, saying he'd be back in a few days. He then went home and hid himself in his room for the rest of the day. When the next morning came, he was hoping to do the same, but when he woke up, there was another card. On the second day before Christmas, I give to you more feminine thoughts, the note read. Eric scoffed and tossed the note away, watching it vanish into their air just as quickly as it appeared. He said there was no way he was going to have more feminine thoughts. He then went to the bathroom and washed his face. Once he was drying it, he looked at his small chest and pouted. He then said out loud, without thinking about it, that he wished they were bigger. He realized right away what he said, and his face turned bright red. He then told himself he wanted them gone, not bigger. He then splashed his face with cold water in an attempt to snap himself out of it. He then went and sat down at his computer to play a game and not think about this whole curse thing he had going on. Eric ended up playing a new farming game he bought. Without thinking about it, he made a cute female character, gave her a cute name and a cute outfit, and went right to growing the flowers in the game, and he was quite happy about it. As the day went on, he found himself doing more things typical girls would do, like browsing cute clothes. He even looked at pictures of guys and messed around with his short hair, which, like his chest, disappointed him a bit. When the next morning came around, there was another note, and this time he tried to run away from it. That didn't work, though. It just appeared in front of him when he ran, and then glowed like it did before, and he was forced to read it. On the third day of Christmas, I give to you much longer and much cuter hair. The note was read before vanishing. Eric gulped and felt his hair growing out. He went to his bathroom again and looked at it. He then took his finger and twirled it around some hair and nearly smiled. He then quickly forced himself to pout and said this was bad. He was a guy and shouldn't have long hair. Eric then grabbed a pair of scissors and cut all his hair off. But instantly, it all grew back to the way it was. Eric sighed and knew there was nothing he could do about it. So he wrapped his chest up again, tossed on a lot of clothes, and went to eat breakfast with his family. When he was in front of them, they looked at him a bit confused, but no one said anything. No one but his sister. She told him his hair was very cute, and she was impressed at how well he did cutting it himself. Eric let out an awkward laugh, but then told her it wouldn't be around for long. That seemed to disappoint her, but she didn't say anything further about it. Despite that, Eric found himself eating breakfast with a smile. She was quite happy that his sister complimented his hair and called him cute, not realizing that was his new feminine way of thinking taking over. He carried that happy vibe for the rest of the day while he did things to pass the time while he waited for that Santa and his wife to return to the mall. The following day he figured he'd check the mall again after finding out what kind of change was in store for him. When he woke up, he watched the note appear, and then he grabbed it. On the fourth day before Christmas, I give to you a much shorter body. Eric sighed as he felt his body shrinking down. When he stood up, he noticed he was at least a foot shorter. It was such a big difference that his tank top that he sleeps in was nearly long enough to be a dress. Eric once again went to his bathroom to check himself, this time using the toilet in order to see into the mirror. When Eric saw himself, he smiled and said he looked cuter at this size. He then turned bright red again and hit his head, realizing he shouldn't look cute, as he was a man. He then said he really needed to find that Mrs. Claus and put an end to all of this. After angering a woman dressed as Mrs. Claus, Eric found himself cursed, and each day he woke up, a note with a different message appeared in front of him, and with each note came a change to his body and mind. The first day gave him a small feminine chest. The second made his thoughts more feminine. The third grew his hair out, and the fourth shrunk him down in height. After the fourth change, Eric realized how much trouble he was in. After losing his height, he went to the mall to see if he could find Mrs. Claus. But they still weren't there, but the employee who Eric spoke to before told him they'd be back tomorrow. Eric sighed, but at least it was good news. So he went back home and avoided everyone, and when the next morning came, he woke up nice and early. He hoped he could avoid the note, but it seemed to arrive the moment he woke up, so he sighed and reached for it. Like before, words appeared on it, and Eric read what it had written on it. On the 5th day before Christmas I give to you much larger thighs. Like the ones before it, the note vanished, and Eric's body started to change. His very skinny thighs had started to get larger, and after only a few seconds the shorts he normally slept in started to stretch, and a few seconds after that he could hear the seams starting to burst. Luckily his thighs stopped growing before that happened, but it still left him with a problem. There was no way he'd be able to slip on any of the pants he owns, and he wasn't sure he could even hide the changes, but he needed to leave, so he had to figure something out. So he snuck out of his room and used the darkness as cover. He made his way down to the laundry room and looked through the dryer. There were a few things he could use that would fit him. The only problem was that they were his mother's, which was a tad embarrassing. Eric took a pair of pants and slipped them on. He then looked down at himself and mumbled a few bad words about the woman who did this to him. Once his frustration and embarrassment died down a bit, Eric left the house and went back to the mall. He arrived just before they opened and asked one of the employees about the Santa and Mrs. Claus he was looking for. He was told they'd be there by the afternoon, so Eric was going to have to wait until they arrived. He tried to just sit around, but that got boring, so he started to walk around the mall. As he did, he'd catch men walking by glancing at him, which made him embarrassed and a bit shy as he knew exactly what they were interested in. Wanting to avoid that, Eric slipped into a clothing store and started looking around, which, to her surprise, seemed interesting. Eric began browsing the clothes and pulling things off the rack, not aware that everything he was looking at was meant for women. After some time, Eric found a cute skirt he really liked, and told himself he was going to buy it, which was when he snapped out of it and realized what he was doing. He quickly put the skirt on a rack and ran out of the store. Eric then went back to his car and watched things on his phone, things a guy would like, of which he now found quite boring. But he did it in order to hold on to his masculine pride, which seemed to be slipping away day by day. The afternoon came after what felt like an eternity, and Eric made his way inside the mall again and found that Santa's village was all set up and there was a line. Eric tried to cut around the line just to talk to Mrs. Claus, but the elf helpers stopped him and made him get in line. Eric sighed but did as they said and got in line, which was long enough to nearly be out the door. It was so long it took 3 hours for Eric to get to the front of the line. When his turn to see Santa came up, Eric walked up to him and looked around for Mrs. Claus, but she wasn't there. Eric asked about her, and Santa held his stomach and laughed as he told Eric that she was off helping a charity by throwing a bake sale. Eric frowned and said he only came here because she did something to him. Santa suddenly looked a bit serious and asked if Eric was the rude boy she talked about. Eric's face turned red and he looked down at the floor, ashamed. Eric said maybe and then asked if he could undo what she's done to him. Santa shook his head and said the only thing he could do for Eric was give him some coal, since he was on the naughty list. Eric pouted a bit and said this wasn't fair. He then asked to talk to Mrs. Claus, but Santa said she was busy and that Eric was holding up the line. The elves came over and started to escort Eric out of the way, but before he got too far, Santa told him they'd be back again in 3 days. Until then, he told Eric to be good, and perhaps things would work out for him. Eric rolled his eyes and cursed Santa out under his breath as he was dragged off. Eric then returned to his car beyond frustrated. Clearly Santa had no say in what was going on, so Eric had to wait for Mrs. Claus to come back and then he'd demand she change him back to normal. After failing to turn back, Eric drove around in his car until it was late, and his family would be asleep. Once again, using the darkness, Eric snuck into his house, grabbed some food and hid himself away in his room. The next morning came quickly and Eric woke up to another note. He grabbed it and glanced at its message. On the 6th day before Christmas, I give to you a more feminine face, the note read. Eric sighed and tossed the note away before it could vanish. He then felt his face changing as he walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Sure enough, his face changed. It was slightly smaller, with a more rounded shape. His eyes were larger with thicker eyelashes surrounding them. Her lips were thicker and her nose was smaller. Eric sighed again, went to the bathroom and went back to bed. When someone came to check on him, he simply said he had caught a cold and wasn't feeling well, so they left him alone. Eric slept all day and decided to do the same thing the next day. When the next morning came and he opened his eyes, he watched the note appear. He grabbed it, then tossed it away without reading it, as he didn't care what it said. He rolled over and went back to sleep, but the note and its magic still activated like normal. This time it read, On the 7th day before Christmas, I give to you naturally acting more feminine. It vanished, and about an hour later Eric's mother woke him up by opening his door and placing food on his dresser. Eric waited for her to leave before he got up to grab it. Eric had no idea, but as he walked over to it, he was swaying his hips as he walked, and his hands were bent slightly upwards, instead of resting completely down like normal. Then when she got her food and sat down to eat it, she put her hair up like she'd been doing it all her life. After eating, she placed the plate where his mother left it, and then went to the bathroom. He then sat to go, after which he got up and let his hair down so he could brush it out. Once he was done, he looked at himself in the mirror and said he really should find a cute shade of lipstick to wear and perhaps some mascara. He then looked at his hair and said maybe he should also buy some sort of hair clip, or even some bows, as those would look cute as well. He then sighed and said he'd do so after he fixed this whole mess, but for now he still needed to wait another day for Santa and Mrs. Claus to come back. So Eric sat down at his desk and started playing games. He spent the rest of the day doing that and hiding under a blanket so his parents, who kept coming to check on him, wouldn't see his changes and ask what was going on. The next morning came around, and this time Eric once again woke up before the sun came out. The note appeared, and Eric grabbed it and read what it said. On the 8th day before Christmas, I give to you much wider hips. Eric gulped as the note vanished, and he felt his body changing again, and with it, his borrowed clothing sounded as though it was ripping. Eric was very embarrassed as he once again had to sneak around and find something that could fit him properly, and in the end all he found was a pair of his mother's super stretchy leggings. Of course they were slightly transparent, so Eric had to borrow one of her dresses to go over it as well. It didn't matter, though. He'd get over the embarrassment and get Mrs. Claus to turn him back. At least that was his plan until he opened the front door and found that there were nearly 3 feet of snow outside, which meant that right now he was trapped at home. It had now been 8 days since Eric got himself cursed by some lady dressed as Mrs. Claus at the mall, and ever since he's been trying to find her and get her to change him back. That was supposed to happen on the 8th day, but when Eric tried to leave his house, he found he was snowed in. He tried to walk through the snow, but it was quite a long way to the mall, and 3 feet of snow was a lot, so he only made it a third of the way before giving up. On his way back, Eric saw an elderly man trying to shovel the snow away from his house, but he was struggling a bit. Eric would normally just ignore something like this and move on, but he felt sort of bad, and seeing as the sun had already come up, he needed to kill some time before he could sneak back into his room without his family seeing the state of his body. So Eric decided to offer his help to the elderly man. Of course, he wasn't prepared for the man's response. Eric, forgetting that on the surface he looks like a woman now, got an earful from the man about how women were useless unless they were in the kitchen. The man's words sounded familiar, And as much as Eric wanted to be mad about how the man was talking down to him because he looked like a woman, he couldn't, as part of him knew he deserved this for how he talked about Mrs. Claus. After the man ran out of steam yelling at Eric for being useless, he nearly fell down. Eric caught him and helped him inside, after which he made the man some tea and had him sit in his chair with a blanket around him. The man got quiet as he looked at the tea. Eric left him to enjoy it, while he headed back outside and shoveled all the snow out of the walkways and driveway. Once Eric tossed the last bit of snow, he turned around to see the elderly man standing there, holding his tea and looking quite sad. Eric felt so bad, he knew something was bothering the man, so he put the shovel away and walked back inside with him. Once inside, the man handed him a cup of hot chocolate and had her sit by the fire to warm up. They sat in silence for a bit before the elderly man broke the silence. He told Eric that he did a great job, and the things he said about women before he didn't really mean. He was just an old lonely man lashing out about things. Though he's not sure why, he told the man he forgave him and understood a bit about misplaced emotions like that, as he had recently done the same things. Eric then asked him what it was he was lashing out about. The elderly man looked out the window and sighed. He then told the story about his late wife, who was amazing at everything. She cooked, cleaned, and sewed everything. She even drove them around and did things like shoveling the driveway. However, one day while doing so, a car hit a patch of ice and ran off the road, hitting her. She ended up in the hospital for some time before passing away. Ever since then, the elderly man had been here doing things alone, and doing them quite poorly. He then mentioned his daughters tried to help him, but he was so worried about them getting hurt as well that he started saying those things about women just to drive them away, and eventually he couldn't stop himself, and those false views of women became real to him. He then said he thought he was okay with it, and normally people didn't speak to him twice after hearing his awful views, but Eric was different. He not only helped him back inside, but also made him tea and still shoveled his yard. Eric forced him to see the light, and that women were actually useful in many ways, especially more than just physical things like cooking and shoveling. Eric couldn't help but smile and tell the man he was glad to have opened his eyes. The two then continued chatting until Eric convinced the man to call his kids and tell them what he told Eric. The man did, and Eric watched as the man talked with his kids for the first time in years, as tears flowed down his face and as he looked happy for what was likely the first time in a long time. By the time it was all over, it was quite dark, so Eric said goodbye to the man and wished him luck with his family reunion. The man wished Eric the best as well and waved to him as Eric walked down the street. Eric got home and snuck inside like he had been doing. He then sat there looking up at the ceiling, thinking about things. He was a lot more like that older man than he wanted to admit, more than he even realized. He did the same thing, pushing women away because he was afraid, even those in his own family, like his sisters and mother. He kept his distance from them and avoided them, or was ruder to them than he should have been. He wasn't entirely sure why, but exploring his feelings, the best guess he had was because he was adopted when he was younger. Before the family he is with now, he used to live alone with another woman, who was his biological mother. He thought she loved him, but she never took care of him. She never paid attention to him, and all she did was lounge around taking strange medicines. In the end, she ended up abandoning Eric, and that's how he ended up being adopted by his current family. Eric took a deep breath and said that was no excuse for how he behaved, and that he understood that now. He then closed his eyes and quickly fell asleep. Morning came around, and Eric woke up feeling quite refreshed. As he sat up, the note of the day appeared, and Eric happily grabbed it. On the 9th day before Christmas, I give to you a bigger backside, the note read. Eric watched it vanish into thin air, then he turned his head and watched as his butt got bigger. Once it was done, Eric lifted his hands and shrugged, saying it really didn't change much at this point. Eric went back to the front door to check the outside, and while it had stopped snowing in the night, there was still a lot of snow on the roads, meaning it would be impossible to drive. so Eric decided to hang out in his room again while he waited for the trucks to clear the roads. The day passed quickly as Eric got distracted posing in the mirror, messing with her hair and looking at clothes online. So when it was dark again, he decided to just sleep and try again in the morning, since he didn't want to drive in the dark if the roads weren't fully cleared yet. The next morning came just as quickly as the last, and another note appeared and vanished. On the 10th day before Christmas, I give to you your first crush, the note read. Eric was a bit confused about that one, as he didn't feel like he was suddenly crushing on someone. So he figured it was a dud and ignored it. He then made his way to his car and started driving towards the mall, which he could do now that there wasn't a ton of snow blocking his way. When Eric arrived, there were a ton of people already there. Eric went inside and found that they were doing an elf workshop thing today, so there were a ton of tables, toy-making equipment, and people dressed as Santa's elves. The elves were running around like crazy, as there were more people at the event than there were elves. As Eric stood there, someone noticed him and came over to him. The man was quite tall for an elf, and more handsome than Eric ever imagined an elf would be. The man started talking to Eric, but Eric didn't hear a word of it. His heart started pounding, and his mind raced as he thought about the man and how cute he was. Eventually the man snapped his fingers and asked Eric if he was listening. Eric nodded and said he was. Eric then accidentally agreed to help out as an elf for the day. That meant he had to wear an elf uniform, which, since his current body was mostly female-shaped, meant he was wearing a green dress with a matching hat and a pair of black leggings, which was slightly embarrassing, at least until the man told Eric he looked cute in it. After that, Eric went around helping kids and their parents build toys, and as it was an all-day event, he was there all day without a break. At the end of the day, when no one else was around, the man thanked Eric for helping out. He then asked Eric to join him for dinner, his treat. Eric, more than excited, agreed and followed him to the food court, where they shared a pizza together while getting to know each other. The two of them really hit it off, and Eric really wanted to hang out with him again, so he asked if he could continue being an elf. He was more than happy to have her as part of the elf team, and told her that the next day was the last day Santa would be at the mall, so it would be quite busy. So having extra help would mean a lot to him and all the kids and families coming to see Santa. Eric told him he'd be there first thing in the morning. He then thanked his crush for the dinner and ran to his car. Once he got home and in his bed, Eric grabbed his pillow and rolled around giggling. He was so happy and so excited, and it was just because of some guy he met today. He fell asleep in his elf costume, which helped a lot as his excitement kept him up late, and he overslept a bit. As soon as he woke up, Eric tapped the note and tossed it away as he ran out of his room and down the stairs. This time, his entire family was in the living room as Eric passed to leave, and all of them saw what he looked like and were a bit confused. But before anyone could ask about it, Eric was in his car getting ready to leave. He did all of that before the note's magic was fully activated. So Eric was quite surprised at the change that suddenly happened between her legs as she sat down on the driver's seat. Not that he read it, but today's note read as follows. On the 11th day before Christmas, I give to you the beautiful gift of womanhood. So Eric's manhood shrank away, officially making her transformation complete. Eric was completely a woman now, and she didn't really care. She turned her car on and drove as quickly and safely as she could until she got to the mall. She luckily got there just in time for Santa's village to begin. Eric got to chat with her crush for a bit before they let the first kid in to see Santa. When Eric brought the kid to Santa, Santa looked at her and smiled. Eric smiled back and stood by his side as the kid told Santa about what she wanted for Christmas, after which Eric helped the kid back to her parents, and her crush gave the parents a printout of their child on Santa's lap. She then got the next child and brought him in. That whole thing then repeated nearly 100 times before Santa took a break. Santa then asked Eric to go get him some milk and cookies, which Mrs. Claus should have on her. Eric nodded and walked around looking for her, and ended up finding her next to the reindeer pen trying to patch up an injury one of the reindeer managed to get. The only problem was the reindeer was in pain and fighting Mrs. Claus's attempt to help it. Eric walked over to the reindeer and put her hand on its head and started petting it while talking to it with a soft, calm tone. Eric told the reindeer it would be okay and that Mrs. Claus knew what she was doing and would make it feel better. That did the trick, and Eric's calming presence kept it still while Mrs. Claus patched it up. Once she was done, Mrs. Claus stood up and thanked Eric, after which she realized who Eric was. Eric got a bit anxious and looked down at the ground, ashamed, as she apologized to Mrs. Claus. Eric told her that she was projecting her own issues on her, and that she used those twisted, wrong views of women as a way to protect herself from the pain she experienced when she was little. Eric looked back up and asked Mrs. Claus to forgive her. Mrs. Claus smiled and put her hand on Eric's head. She then told Eric there was nothing to forgive, that none of this was really a punishment, but instead an early Christmas present. With this change, she can open her eyes and leave the pains of yesterday behind and look towards a better future. Eric smiled and thanked Mrs. Claus for that, saying she was definitely looking forward to the future now, which she said as her eyes drifted towards her crush, who was playing tag with the kids waiting to see Santa. Mrs. Claus chuckled and called Eric cute, then asked Eric if she came here for something. Eric looked a bit panicked and said she came here for milk and cookies for the big man. Mrs. Claus chuckled some more and said he wouldn't be able to get anything done without them. Eric chuckled alongside her and then said it was a good thing he had her around, as Christmas couldn't happen without her. That made Mrs. Claus smile even more. Eric got the milk and cookies from her, thanked her again and brought them to Santa. After his snack break, they all got back to work. Santa on his chair talking to children, Eric leading the children to him, her crush taking photos, and Mrs. Claus handing out candy canes she made herself to everyone who arrived. Hours passed and the mall eventually closed, which meant everyone got to go home. Eric's crush asked to walk her out to her car, which she agreed to, but beforehand she wanted to say goodbye to Santa and Mrs. Claus. They were both happy to see her, and they both patted her on the head and said they were proud of her for the progress she's made in the last few days, even if some of it was magically influenced. Eric laughed and said a lot of her change came from an old man she met and helped. Santa nodded his head and said he knew. Then he said the name of the elderly man Eric had helped, which shocked her a bit. Eric knew Mrs. Claus was magical of some sort, but she didn't truly believe they were the real Santa and Mrs. Claus. At least, not until now. Eric looked down at herself and blushed a bit. She then looked up at Mrs. Claus and asked about her changes. Mrs. Claus smiled and told Eric that there was one more note. She then lifted her hand and both she and Santa vanished, and a few seconds later Eric heard sleigh bells. Eric smiled and turned around, wondering what the note in the morning would say. Eric's crush waved to her and she smiled before running up to him and walking by his side as they went to their cars. They spent a bit of extra time at the cars just chatting under the stars. After it got way too late, Eric went home and went up to her bedroom. She once again laid down in her elf dress and passed out, as she was beyond exhausted from working hard all day. When she opened her eyes in the morning, she waited for the final note to appear. Once it did, she sat up and grabbed it. The words magically appeared and Eric read them aloud. On the 12th day of Christmas, I give to you a simple choice. Eric raised an eyebrow as more words began to appear. Return to your old self and go about life like you would have, or embrace your new self, and reality will change to match it. The choice is yours alone. No magic will influence how you feel. Just let your heart decide. Eric looked down at the note. So many thoughts were flowing through her head. At first she was super embarrassed about the feminine changes, but now she really doesn't mind them, and she's come to enjoy a few things about being female. At the same time, being male was all she knew, so becoming female from now on would be challenging. Many different pros and cons of each life passed through her head until her crush appeared. Just thinking of him made her happy and had her heart pounding. But the note said magic wasn't influencing her at the moment, which meant she actually liked him. If she went back to being male, he wouldn't be interested in her anymore, and she wasn't sure she could stop loving him. Eric pressed the note up against her chest, right where her heart was. She then asked it to make the right choice, and whatever it picked, she'd be happy with. Eric then closed her eyes and waited. After a few seconds, she felt the note vanish. Eric then gulped, as she was nervous about which one it picked. But before she could open her eyes and check, Eric's older sister knocked on the door. She then called out the name Erica, and then told her little sis to hurry up, as their parents were waiting for her to eat breakfast. Erica opened her eyes and looked at the door for a second, then down at herself. She was still female, and she was still wearing the elf dress. So it seemed her heart made a choice. She was going to stay female.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Also check out my Patreon and DeviantArt pages. There you can find all my public stories. You can also support my work by getting early access to all stories, exclusive content, and even commission me to make you a custom story. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great day.